Hi, and welcome to another Elder Watch mini-series. Today, we'll be talking about pet scams. This presentation and the whole series is brought to you by Elder Watch. Elder Watch is a 20-plus year collaboration between AARP and the Colorado Attorney General's Office. We seek to protect and support older Coloradans by providing education and outreach throughout the state related to fraud and financial literacy. We also have a volunteer-staffed fraud victim support helpline should you or someone you know be the victim of a pet scam or any other type of scam or fraud. If that sounds like you or someone you know, or maybe you saw a puppy on Facebook and it's $200 less than it normally would be and you're not sure if it's a good idea, go ahead and give us a call. We'll help you out. Our phone number is 800-222-4444, select option 2. My name is Jessica Zawadsky, and I am the program specialist for Elder Watch Colorado. Today, we'll be talking about pet scams, and specifically, we'll be talking about online pet scams. So first, we'll talk about some of the data, some of my motivation for creating this presentation. After that, we'll talk about what I'm calling the scam, which is kind of the archetype, the playbook that we tend to see in pet scams. After that, we'll go over some of the red flags that might indicate that the deal you found is too good to be true, or maybe that animal isn't real. So I'll arm you with information about some of those red flags. After that, we'll go into some of the calls we've gotten here on the helpline about pet scams, and we'll follow that with tips to stay safe, as well as what to do if you experience a pet scam and resources to help you find a new pet in a safe way. Even though they are not the most common type of scam that we get here on the Elder Watch helpline, pet scams are nonetheless devastating. They definitely spiked during the COVID-19 pandemic, but they're still running rampant here in 2024. In fact, in the last 3 years, the Better Business Bureau has received nearly 10,000 scam reports about companies selling puppies and dogs. Now, keep in mind that pet scams are not only puppy scams. There are lots of other animals involved in pet scams. So 10,000 just on businesses selling dogs and puppies as fraudulent. Despite this number, the Federal Trade Commission estimates that only about 10% of victims of pet scams actually report these crimes. So the number of individuals who have experienced a pet scam is probably much higher. In fact, in 2023, Americans were scammed out of over $1 million in online puppy fraud alone. Now, we know that there is a loneliness epidemic in our country, and pets can be a great source of companionship for anyone. Scammers also know this, and they're exploiting our kind hearts to try to make a buck. When it comes to pet scams, today we'll be talking about online pet scams. In this category, there tend to be 3 stories, archetypes, whatever you want to call it, that we tend to experience here on the Elder Watch helpline. The first one is the fake breeder page. And so this is when someone makes a fake website, usually for one specific type of animal. So for example, maybe you're looking for a Cairn Terrier. A fake breeder page would then have taken pictures of Cairn Terriers from the internet, sometimes even from other pet sites. Sometimes they'll even take videos from other pet websites, put them on their page, make it look legitimate, tricking you into thinking that this is a real Cairn Terrier breeder page. The second one is closely related, and this has to do with fake advertisement. So in this type of pet scam, you will get a pop-up, a sponsored web page, directing you to this fake breeder page. And then the last one that we'll talk about is the fake post. And so this tends to happen a lot on Facebook or Craigslist, and Facebook Marketplace. And this is where someone, a regular person, posts that they have an animal for sale or they're looking for a good home. Sometimes it will be free if you pay for shipping or handling. Usually there is a time crunch for getting that animal, and often there is a tragic backstory for why the individual is getting rid of this animal. So now that we know the general form that these scams tend to take, let's look at some of the red flags that you might be experiencing a pet scam. Purchasing a pet online can be really convenient and also give you way more options and selection than you might otherwise have, depending on where you live, but it doesn't come without risk. So here are 7 red flags that might tip you off that instead of purchasing a pet, you're actually helping to line the pockets of a scammer. So the first red flag is the price seems too good to be true, or it's significantly lower than what you would normally expect for that pet. And when I say significantly lower, I'm talking about 50% or more lower. So if whatever dog you wanted is normally $5,000, now you see it for $1,200, that's a little suspicious. Now, that in itself doesn't mean that it's a scam, but your scam radar should be going. The second red flag that is also a red flag in many other types of scams, not just pet scams, is an alternative or unconventional payment method. And so by this, I mean the scammer asks you to buy your snake with Visa gift cards or maybe through a wire transfer. That's suspicious. That's a red flag. The third red flag that is a huge thing that we see in pet scams specifically is the request for additional payments that were not initially agreed upon. So often in pet scams, this comes in the form of a particular crate or special shipping and handling. So you've already paid all the money and now they say, oh, actually, you also need to pay for this special crate or they'll be held at customs or something like that. Big, big, big red flag that you're probably involved in a scam, especially if once you pay it, okay, now there's another issue that you need to pay for that was not in your original agreement. Now, a big red flag that we see in all kinds of scams is this emotional manipulation to act quickly. And in pet scams, sometimes people will, after the second or third or fourth payment that wasn't agreed upon, they'll start to get a little suspicious and maybe push back on the scammer or refuse an additional payment, at which point the scammer begins threatening the individual. Sometimes they'll say, I'm going to get you arrested for animal abandonment. Sometimes they say it's abuse. Sometimes they say the animal will be kept in quarantine for 7 months. These threats, especially after you've spent, all of this money on these additional fees, red flag. Now, another red flag that is a huge red flag is with both pet scams and actually, I will also say romance scams, is that you're never allowed to see the person and the animal in person or on video chat. So sometimes this will look like the scammer will only talk to you on the phone, the scammer will only talk to you via email, the scammer will only text you. Sometimes I've also seen it where you go ahead and you try to video call the scammer and then they don't answer the video call, but then they text you saying like, I'm in a meeting or something like that. And there's all these excuses. Now, it's really important to be able to, kind of know who you're working with and to get to see the personality of your pet, because we know that pets, most pets, like people, we're all a little bit different. You want to make sure it's a good fit. And usually the breeder or the seller, wherever you're getting it from, also wants to make sure it's a good fit. So if they are dodging your request or flatly refusing to do a video call or an in-person call, if your location permits, that is a red flag. Now, this one is particularly for scammers masquerading as legitimate breeders, and this is that they don't or won't or can't provide you health information, pedigree, medical history, things like that. That's something that a breeder should have. So if they're not able to provide you, even when it comes to the parents' health and lineage, this information that you're asking for, that's a red flag. And then lastly, the last red flag that we'll talk about is particularly for dogs and dog breeders. So not necessarily somebody who's moving and so they're getting rid of their dog. This doesn't really apply to them, but it is a red flag if you find a breeder page and they are selling or saying that they breed a bunch of different kinds of dogs. So for example, if you're interacting with a single breeder who is selling Siberian Huskies and Pomeranians and Pugs and Mastiffs, that's a red flag. Usually breeders will focus on a particular breed of dog, and that's kind of all that they do. And, this kind of makes sense given that all of these breeds are different, they have different temperaments, all that kind of thing. So if you find a breeder who has just like dozens of different dog breeds that they are breeding, as opposed to it being a rescue or something like that, that's a red flag. You might want to think twice. Now that we've talked about some of the general red flags, as well as the archetype of the scam for pet scams, let's get into some real life calls that we've received here on the helpline and identify some of those red flags. So I mentioned before, but not all pet scams are with common pets that we might think of as pets, like cats and dogs. So I want to start off by talking about a monkey scam. Before I do that, though, I will say I am not supporting or denouncing owning a pet monkey. Every state is different in terms of whether you can have one or not. And here in Colorado, it is not legal to own a pet monkey. Nonetheless, let's look at the scam. So our caller found someone selling pet monkeys online, and they found a pet monkey for $800. They agreed to pay this price, but after they paid the $800 for their new pet monkey, the seller began asking for more and more and more in terms of payments for just little tiny add-ons. Eventually, the caller became hesitant about paying all of these fees, at which point the breeder threatened the seller with arrest, saying that they would be imprisoned for animal abandonment should they not pay these fees. Now, here we see a couple of our red flags. The first one is that the cost for this pet monkey is very low. Now, there's lots of different kinds of monkeys, and in this particular call, the seller or the caller didn't tell us what type of monkey they were looking for, but monkeys generally will range from about $1,500 to over $80,000 as pets, so $800 is pretty low. Now, a discount alone doesn't necessarily mean that it's a scam, but there's some other red flags here too that might tip us off to a scammer. So for one, we see the classic activity of asking for more and more and more after that initial payment has been made. Huge red flag. And then we also see that once the caller became kind of suspicious and was hesitant about paying these exorbitant extra fees, that the seller then began threatening them. That is, those three things are very, very common of a pet scam. Let's look at another one. So in this one, we've got a little kitty cat. A caller was looking online at breeder websites, which wound up being fake breeder websites, like we talked about in the archetype slide, and they found a Maine Coon cat. The breeder was listing the cat at $1,900, and the caller sent $1,900 to purchase the cat. The seller then told them that they would need actually an extra $1,200, that they had misspoke on the cost. So the caller goes ahead and sends another $1,200. But this time they send it in Bitcoin. The first $1,900 was sent on Cash App. The second $1,200 is sent on Bitcoin. After that, the scammer said that they needed to purchase a special crate for the new cat, and that this would be $700, which was for shipping and handling for the crate. And so the caller thought, okay, that sounds reasonable. So they paid that as well. Now, finally, the scammer told our caller that the cat in question had developed a couple of medical ailments that would require additional shots, vaccinations, and treatment, and that they would need to pay via Cash App because the scammer said that they had never received the Bitcoin. And so they were kind of, trying to be like, it's okay, don't worry about it. But we actually know the truth. So more than $3,800 later, unfortunately, our caller never received their new cat. So which red flags do you see here? From the beginning, the first red flag is requesting payment through an alternative payment method. So in this case, Bitcoin and Cash App. Red flag. After that, we see that common occurrence of compounding costs. Let's look at another one. In another call, our caller's father was purchasing a French bulldog from a breeder that he found on Facebook, and he became suspicious because the breeder was unwilling to schedule a video chat to verify their legitimacy and to let them see this particular cat in question. Because they were suspicious, later on, the daughter ran a reverse image search on some of the French bulldogs that were listed on that page. Come to find out, they had been stolen from a real breeder's web page. Thankfully, in this case, the caller's father didn't provide any money or personal information, which is wonderful. But I think it's another good example of a situation where the red flags might help save the day once we know how to recognize them. So in this case, the red flag is that the caller's father was not allowed to see the dog or meet the breeder or have any kind of communication that would help verify the authenticity of this transaction. Because on a phone call, not quite as easy to suss out whether this is legitimate or not, but having a phone call or FaceTime, video chat, whatever, with the breeder and the pet will definitely give you some more information about the legitimacy of the company. Now, another red flag here is one that we didn't talk about, or we talked about a little bit, but it's reusing these photos from other web pages. So later on, we'll talk about some tips to stay safe, but thankfully in this case, the caller's daughter was able to spot that these pictures had actually been taken from somewhere else. And the last turn on the helpline that we'll chit chat about is about a parrot. So in this case, there was a caller, they were looking for a pet parrot, and they found a woman on Facebook who was looking to rehome one. Now, the Facebook post said that the parrot was free to a good home. The buyer would just need to pay for shipping and handling, which they had listed at $200. So the caller thought that, okay, this sounds pretty legitimate. They were looking forward to adopting a pet that needed a new home. They thought $200, seemed fair for shipping and handling. So they went ahead and they sent the money through Zelle. Later, when it was time for, delivery to commence, the caller was contacted by the delivery company who said that the caller had to pay an additional $600 more for a special crate because of the temperature, and the parrot needed the special crate in order to withstand the colder weather that it would be experiencing. Now, caller went ahead and sent this money, still thinking, okay, $800 for this particular parrot it's okay, and going to a good home, it's fine. Then the delivery company says they never received the money that the caller had sent, so they send it again. So which red flags do you see here? First, we see that the price is way too good to be true. Free is way too good to be true, right? And of course, there are some cases where maybe that is legitimate. So like I said before, that low price on its own might not mean that it's a scammer, but there's some other scams here as well. So some other red flags here as well, I should say. So again, we see the uncommon payment method and we see the building up of fees. But in this scam, the scammer employs a pretty tricky tactic by introducing a third party. So they introduce a fictitious delivery driver who maybe is the same scammer themselves. And they do this to pretend to be the delivery company, take some of the heat off of the seller, kind of makes things seem a little bit more legitimate. So these are only 4 cases. We have hundreds of cases of pet scams, but I picked these 4 because I think that they really illustrate some of those red flags that we should be looking out for when it comes to purchasing a pet. So in addition to telling you some of the red flags to kind of look out for, I also want to give you some proactive tools that you can use and that you can implement to keep yourself from falling victim to a pet scam. And the first one is a reverse image search. So if you've never heard of that before, essentially all it is doing a reverse search. So instead of typing words into a search engine, you're putting a picture into a search engine. And you can often do this by copy and pasting or saving and then dragging the picture into Google or Bing or whatever you're using. And the reason that this is helpful is because when it comes to those fake breeder page scams that we talked about, they're just getting their pictures from other places on the internet. So if you find the same exact dog that you're looking for, the same exact background, the same exact everything on another page, potentially that is a scam, especially if the photo was posted on that page further back than when you were viewing it. So for example, if you see a picture of, let's see, what pet? You see a picture of a chinchilla that is on the web page that you're looking at, but then you go back and you see that the same chinchilla picture was posted somewhere else 6 months before, you're probably dealing with a scammer. Now, the second tip I want to give you to stay safe is requesting references. And this is definitely more for those fake breeder pages and the pop-ups than it would be for somebody, for example, rehoming a dog on Craigslist. And so if you're working with a breeder, presumably they have had customers besides you. So requesting references can be a really great way to get a better understanding of who you're dealing with and whether it's legitimate. Now, I will say that it's not unheard of that, for example, you request a reference, the scammer gives you a reference to somebody else who is within their scam network. So in that case, it's kind of a moot point. So this shouldn't be your only tool in the tool chest, but it's definitely a good one to know about. The next one, number 3, we have talked about a little bit before, but I think it's a really, really important one. And in this one, it is requesting a video call with the breeder or doing an in-person visit if you can do that as well. This is a great way to make sure that you are staying safe, but also on the flip side, if whoever you're dealing with keeps refusing a video call or in person, or, I've seen too where you call the person on video call, they send you a text back. So if you keep getting that, you keep getting excuses, you never get responses to these requests, or maybe they, change the subject, red flag. Generally, breeders also want to make sure that their animals are going to a safe and happy home. So if they're not willing to interact with you in this way to ensure goodness of fit, red flag. And then the last one I'll mention is a big tip for all kinds of different scams, not just pet scams, and that is paying with a credit card if possible. Now, credit cards are generally safer for online purchases because there's a little bit more oversight and there's a higher chance that you could get your money back if you fall victim to a scam. Whereas for things like Venmo, PayPal, Zelle, and even sometimes debit cards, and also gift cards, sometimes scammers will ask you to pay for a pet and gift cards. It's really, really unlikely that you'll be able to get your money back because there's fewer protections. And for some of those alternative payment methods, there's just less oversight. If you experience a pet scam, first off, I just want to say I'm sorry. I love my pets. Having a pet can be a wonderful addition to your life. And I hope that you're able to find a more reputable place to get a new friend soon. And I'll have some tips on that in a couple slides. But if you have experienced a pet scam, first you can give us a call here on the Elder Watch helpline. And that phone number is 800-222-4444, select option 2. You should also go ahead and alert the payment method or financial institution that you used. Like I said, depending on how you paid for it, the chances of you getting your money back might be slim to none, but it's still a good idea, especially because depending on, again, how you paid for it, scammers might now have access to some personal financial information, and you want to make sure that they can't take any more from you than they already have. After that, we're looking at reporting, essentially to stop the scammers from hurting anybody else. So the first place you can report is to the Federal Trade Commission. The next place is to the IC3, which is the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center. Now, that is obviously specifically for online sales, but we're talking about online pet sales, so worth putting that in there. And then lastly, if you found the pet on social media, on Facebook, on Craigslist, whatever, report that account so that it gets shut down and so that hopefully no one else falls to that particular scam. All right, so you're saying, okay, Jessica, now I know the tips, I know the red flags, I've heard those horror stories, and I'm ready to get a pet. I'm an informed consumer, let's go. In which case, woohoo! So for finding a pet in general, and by this I mean maybe you want a dog, but you don't care if it's a Chihuahua or a Lab. The first tip I'm going to say is visit your local shelter. And this is not just for cats and dogs. Local shelters have all kinds of other pets, from rodents to snakes to, I've even seen an iguana at one of the shelters, and a snake and fish. So checking out your local shelter is definitely a great route to take. And when you do this, they also often provide some of those vaccinations, additional care, things like that. So I am a huge fan of shelters. Many of my pets are rescues, so definitely would recommend. We have a lot of great organizations here in Denver that do specifically that. Next, looking at adoption events can be a really great way to find a pet. These are sometimes, by our office, there's one that will sometimes happen at a coffee shop, and this is a great way to meet and greet an animal in person and be able to ask some of those questions. Lastly, ask people in your life and your community where they got their pet. You might be surprised, and you might even find some great new places that you hadn't considered to look for your new family member. Now, if you're looking for a specific breed of pet, going through a shelter might be a little bit trickier. So, for example, I have 2 crested geckos. I'm probably not going to find crested geckos at the shelter with the particular features that I was looking for. And so, the first tip I'll give you is to look for or to contact a veterinarian. You're going to need a vet anyway if you get a pet, especially if you didn't have a pet and now you're getting a pet or you're getting a new kind of vet. So you're going to need to find a vet anyway. And vets will often have information on reputable breeders, sellers, things like that, because they're treating other animals and or they have clients who have gotten those animals from reputable sources. For dogs, you can use the American Kennel Club. They have a special website called the Marketplace that will help you find legitimate breeders who also have those pedigrees, right, through the American Kennel Club. So definitely go to that website. It is marketplace.akc.org. And then lastly, I'll say for reptiles, amphibians, insects, arachnids, exotic pets, look for a local expo. Here in Denver, we have a couple every couple of months, and they're wonderful because in addition to getting to meet those individual breeders, you also have a huge selection of whatever it is that you're looking for. So I mentioned my crested geckos before. I went to the All-American Plant and Reptile Expo at the Douglas County Fairgrounds, and I had my pick of hundreds of crested geckos, as well as all of the supplies that I needed to get my cresties up and running. So definitely recommend going to an expo if you're looking for a more specific and particularly an exotic type of pet. There are lots of different ones all over Colorado. Awesome way to go about it and learn a lot about the pet that you are looking for, as well as where it comes from, what it eats, all of that good stuff. Thank you for joining me today as we talk a little bit about pet scams. As I mentioned, they're not necessarily the most frequent call that we get here on the helpline, but that doesn't mean that they don't have a huge impact on our community, on ourselves, on our faith in others, and also in our ability to have pets. So thank you so much for taking some time to learn about pet scams, as well as how to stay safe if you're looking to bring a furry, feathered, scaly, whatever other texture animal into your life. If you'd like to learn even more about pet scams, check out stopfraudcolorado.gov or visit us on AARP. You can go to aarp.org/money/scams-fraud/. For Elder Watch Colorado, my name is Jessica Zawadzki. Thanks for joining me. Enjoy your new pet and have a great rest of your day. We'll see you next time to talk about some more less common scams in 2024.